Stillness haunted the royal palace, as if time itself had chosen to linger in mourning. Queen Lyra Vane stood before a flickering hologram, the last transmission of her daughter Kaelin. The recording was incomplete, damaged by battle fire and static, but the final words played over and over like a cruel mantra. "I'm sorry, Mother. This is bigger than us." Then silence. Always silence. 7 years had passed since that day, and yet the chamber still smelled faintly of Ioni's metal and burned ozone, the sense of warships and dying engines. The galaxy celebrated peace, but Lyra's nights were filled with ghosts. Beyond her walls, the Empire prepared for the Grand Concord Summit, a gathering of worlds bound by fragile treaties. Diplomats from 20 systems demanded accommodations, atmospheric domes, gravity adjustments, ceremonial cuisines. To them, it was politics. To Lyra, it was performance, an illusion of unity masking the fractures spreading across the stars. Border colonies whispered of rebellion. Old enemies plotted in shadows. Peace was no more stable than glass. Her advisors urged her to dismantle the memorial hologram. "It weakens you," they said. "It invites doubt." But the Queen refused. To forget Kaelin was to forget the war itself, and she would not grant the galaxy that luxury. Even her most loyal minister noticed the change. Lyra had once commanded entire fleets with a single glance. Now her eyes carried the weight of someone who had led armies into hell and lost what mattered most. She wore a crown like a shield, silver robe shimmering with the authority of Atoria, but inside she was hollowed by absence. And still, the galaxy demanded her strength. Soon, she would stand before the council and promise stability. Soon, she would pretend the wounds of war had healed. Yet even as attendants rehearsed ceremonial processions and courtiers polished diplomatic scripts, Lyra remained in that chamber, staring at the face of a daughter who never came home. She whispered into the static, not as a queen but as a mother. "If you can hear me, if there's anything left of you, come back." Unheard, unanswered, but far from the palace, in a forgotten sector of broken moons and scavenger fleets, fate was already preparing an answer, and when it arrived, it would not come gently. The day of the Grand Concord Summit dawned beneath twin suns, their golden light spilling across the crystalline towers of Atoria. Banners of every allied world rippled in the high winds, and for the first time in years, the palace hummed with cautious optimism. Delegations arrived in fleets of polished ships, their representatives dressed in ceremonial armor and diplomatic robes, each one eager to bargain for influence in the new era of peace. Queen Lyra prepared herself as duty demanded, every gesture measured, every word rehearsed. She was the face of stability now, the living symbol that the scars of war had finally healed. Yet beneath the surface, her heart remained anchored to the same unanswered question. What if Kaelin had lived? It was a thought she buried daily, but never completely. The summit chamber swelled with voices, languages colliding like waves against the same shore. Speeches were delivered, promises exchanged. Lyra listened, nodded, and performed her role, until the room fell silent. A ripple of unease spread through the assembly as the grand doors creaked open. 2 silhouettes appeared against the blinding light, one tall and armored, the other smaller, shoulders squared with the weight of defiance. Gasps echoed through the hall as the smaller figure stepped forward. Kaelin, alive, changed. Her once pristine uniform was torn and scorched, her face traced with thin scars that glimmered faintly under the chamber's light. But it was her eyes that held the room still, fierce, steady, and older than her years. And beside her stood a human man, rough around the edges, his flight jacket patched and worn. He moved with a relaxed confidence, as if walking into a royal summit were no different from entering a tavern. Lyra's breath caught. For 7 years, she had dreamed of this moment. In every version, Kaelin ran to her, tearful and apologetic, but the woman standing before her did neither. She offered no bow, no formal greeting, only a quiet, resolute nod. "I came back," Kaelin said, her voice hoarse but unwavering. But not alone. The human stepped forward, scanning the hall with sharp, curious eyes. "Name's Reese," he said, with a faint, irreverent grin. "I saved her life. Then she saved mine. So, I suppose we're even." And just like that, the galaxy shifted. The summit chamber erupted into chaos. Questions crashed over each other in a dozen languages. How had she survived? Where had she been? Why return now? But beneath the shock, something colder slithered through the air. Suspicion. Kaelin felt it immediately. The counselor's smiles were too tight, their words too carefully measured. To them, she was not a miracle. She was an unknown variable, a living complication. And the man beside her, the human, was even worse. "Who is he?" one delegate hissed. "A mercenary," another murmured. "Or a spy?" Reese shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny but didn't flinch. "I'm standing right here," he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Kaelin to hear. She smirked despite herself. The same irreverence that had once kept her sane on a desolate moon now served as an anchor in this storm of politics. Queen Lyra rose from her throne. The whole fell silent. For a long moment, mother and daughter simply stared at each other, 7 years of grief and guilt suspended between them. Then, without a word, Lyra stepped down from the dais and embraced her daughter. The gesture was brief, almost formal, but it was enough to fracture the tension. Not everyone was convinced. A council member from the outer colonies demanded an inquiry. Others whispered of infiltration and treachery. Kaelin answered each question with steady composure, refusing to reveal more than she had to. The truth about the Crimson Ascendancy, the hidden war that had continued beyond the stars, could not yet be spoken. Not here. Not now. That night, as the palace lights dimmed, Kaelin and Reese found themselves alone on a balcony overlooking the capital. The stars stretched endlessly, each one a reminder of the secret she carried. "You're holding something back," Reese said quietly. Kaelin didn't deny it. "There are forces moving against this empire, ones that want to finish what the war started. My return disrupts their plans. That's why they're afraid." Almost on cue, the night shattered with an explosion, distant but close enough to rattle the palace walls. Sirens wailed. God shouted. Reese drew a weapon instinctively. "Guess we're not exactly on the welcome list." Kaelin stared into the flames rising in the distance. "No," she whispered, "and this is just the beginning." The explosion was only the beginning. By dawn, the palace was sealed under emergency protocol, security patrols doubled, and the summit suspended indefinitely. Officials called it a technical accident, but everyone knew better. Someone wanted chaos, and Kaelin's return had given them the perfect excuse. The first attempt on her life came less than 24 hours later. A serving drone, indistinguishable from thousands of others, glided silently into her chamber. It carried a tray of herbal tea, her favorite blend, a detail known only to those within the palace walls. Reese's instinct screamed before logic caught up. He snatched the cup from her hands and scanned it with his battered field detector. The readout blinked red, neurotoxin. One sip would have been fatal. By the time the palace guard traced the drone's programming, the signal trail vanished into encrypted layers of the royal network, a system Kaelin herself once helped design. Whoever was behind it knew the palace intimately. 2 days later, a second attempt followed. This time, a malfunctioning gravelift nearly hurled her from a 100-story balcony. 3 hours after that, a coded message appeared on her personal comm, full words she hadn't heard in years. "The fire still burns." Kaelin's heart sank. The phrase was the motto of the Crimson Ascendancy, the same faction she'd infiltrated and betrayed. Somehow, they knew she was alive, and they were here. "Somebody inside is working with them," Reese muttered, pacing the chamber. "Could be council, could be your mother's advisors. Hell, could be someone you grew up with." She didn't answer. The thought had crossed her mind. 2. Later that night, she and Reese slipped through hidden corridors beneath the palace, ancient tunnels once used by royal spies, and reached a forgotten intelligence hub buried deep below the throne room. There, Kaelin accessed encrypted data she'd hidden before the war ended. It was a list, names of powerful officials who had once funded Crimson's operations. Some were dead, others still sat on the council. "Now you understand," Kaelin whispered, handing the tablet to Reese. "I didn't come back to reclaim a throne. I came back to finish what I started." And in that dim, silent chamber, one truth became terrifyingly clear. The real war had never ended. It had simply gone underground, and Kaelin's return had just brought it roaring back to life. The list changed everything. It was proof, undeniable, explosive proof, that the Crimson Ascendancy wasn't an enemy from the outside. It had been growing within the Alliance all along, feeding on ambition and fear. Some of the names were familiar faces Kaelin had once trusted. Others were council members who had shaken her hand just days before. When Queen Lyra saw the evidence, her composure cracked for the first time in years. If this is true, she whispered, our government is rotten to the core. It's not just true, Kaelin replied. It's worse. They don't want to destroy the Alliance. They want to own it. The Queen wanted to expose him immediately, but Kaelin knew the truth. A public reveal would spark civil war. Systems would fracture overnight. So, instead, she made a choice that would define her future. She walked away from the throne room and into the shadows once more. With Rhys at her side, she reached out to the forgotten corners of the galaxy, rebel colonies abandoned after the war, frontier fleets with no allegiance, scientists silenced for speaking against corruption. One by one, they answered her call. They weren't soldiers or politicians. They were believers in something better. They called themselves the Phoenix Accord, a coalition built on trust, transparency, and justice. And this time, Kaelin would not fight to reclaim the past. She would build a new future from its ashes. The council labeled her a traitor. State media painted her as a usurper. But every attempt to silence her only made her message louder. And through it all, Rhys stayed beside her, fixing ships, forging alliances, and cracking jokes that made the weight of destiny just a little easier to bear. On the eve of their first mission, Kaelin stood at the viewport of their rebuilt flagship, watching the stars drift by like embers in a dark sea. Do you regret it? She asked quietly. Rhys shook his head. Not for a second. Besides, it's too late to turn back now. She smiled, small, fierce, unstoppable. Then let's light the galaxy on fire. The engines roared to life. And for the first time in years, Kaelin wasn't running from her past. She was chasing the future.